I'm going to call our meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the Ojai Planning Commission for March 19th, 2014. Members of the public wishing to address the Planning Commission on items appearing on the agenda are requested to complete a speaker's card and file it with Secretary Amber prior to the start of the meeting. Cards are available in the lobby. Speakers should state their name and address for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. Comments must be directed to the Commission, not the audience. While the Planning Commission is in session, all in attendance are expected to maintain order and decorum and to obey the orders of the Chair. Commissioner Jagiel, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And I can say I've already gotten the agenda out of order. Amber, could we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Zabia?
Zabilla, here.
Zabilla, my apologies. Commissioner Jagiello? Commissioner Foster?
Here.
Commissioner Nolan?
Here.
Chair Merck?
Here. I'm going to make one other change in the agenda. Betsy Clapp, our City Council liaison, asked if she could speak at the beginning of the meeting instead of at the end. So I'm going to have our City Council liaison report first.
Hi. I'm coming humbly before you to let you know that I have requested that the direction given by City Council to staff to look at the potential of changing the structure of the Planning Commission from 7 people, as many as 3 outside of the city out of the city residences, to all being within the city only. That I have requested that it be reconsidered, and it will be reconsidered on the 25th of this month, which will be the next meeting. And I personally, speaking for myself, want to tell you that I think it is one of the worst decisions that I've ever seen since I've been on council. I've said repeatedly that this is the best planning commission we've ever had. I don't care where you live. That your time that you've devoted to this community, for myself, has been greatly appreciated and is beyond any value that anybody in this city ever realizes. You do it quietly. You don't brag about it. You just do it because you love the community. So I am hoping that my colleagues will have thought about it over the past couple of weeks, and that they too will realize what a horrible mistake it is, what an insult it was to you, and what a disservice it would be to our community to lose you because of the notion that in this valley that is so small, that only people that live within the city limits can have any sort of passion and caring for the community. I think that's a terrible mistake. I think it's clear, and I don't want to see our community torn apart by something so ill thought out. And I encourage all of you, if you wish to speak to the other council members, I encourage you to call. I'm sure that they would like to hear from you. I also encourage you to please come to the meeting. I think it's important that people realize what they're doing and that you're there to see that it's being done to people that care dearly about this community. So again, it's going to be reconsidered on March 25th. The meeting starts at 7 p.m. and I hope to see all of you there. And personally, as an individual speaking, I hope that this doesn't go through. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Clapp. Did anybody on the commission have any questions for our City Council liaison? All right, good. We'll move on to the next item, which is the consent item, the minutes of the special joint meeting of the Planning Commission, March 5th, 2014.
Could I pull this off consent? I'd like to amend how the record reflects what my comments were last time. So what I said last time that I'd like the record to reflect is that I feel that removing I wanted to counter the notion that somehow removing the deed restriction, limiting people with second units on their property only to be, one of the units having to be owner-occupied, that isn't something that's going to encourage hordes of investors breaking down our doors. Investors feel our properties are too high. They cannot get the rents that they want, so therefore they don't buy our properties merely to rent out 2 units. Does it ever happen? Sure, it sometimes happens, but for the most part, investors come in and they say, what are the rents? And then they walk away because our properties are too expensive, and that's good. That's what encourages owner-occupied properties normally. So that's essentially what you see in Ojai. And again, I also wanted to reiterate that I think it's a really outdated notion that renters don't take care of properties. If half of our community are renters, and this is one way for people to afford to live here, then we need to support that as well. They are the glue. If 50% are renting, then they are the glue of our community too. So I just want the record to reflect that. Thank you. And I make a motion to include these now in.
So you're saying, Rosalie, it says here under your comments, you had a question about when the deed restriction was in effect. You said it was an outdated notion that renters maintain substandard properties, which I guess you just addressed. And then it says the deed restriction hinders the desired return on investment. Do you want to just strike that?
I'd like that stricken, yeah.
Okay. So can you make a motion to that effect, and then we can vote on it?
Can we make a motion to amend my comments in that way?
Sure.
Okay.
Do we have a second for that?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Zabilla?
Yes.
Jagiello?
Yes.
Foster?
Yes.
Nolan?
Yes.
Chair Merk?
Yes. So I'm going to amend this copy that I have here to basically strike that last line. Okay. Next is the Municipal Advisory Planning Commission Liaison Report. Did we have a MAC meeting?
Actually, there was a meeting.
Okay.
It's the first one since January, I think they had, and I was able to attend that and represent Planning Commission as our liaison. And it was short, but it was interesting. This meeting was scheduled with the idea of having Caltrans representatives there, which they showed up in force. There were at least 4 of them. And I think it was pretty much designed to be an informational meeting for primarily for the residents in the Oakview area. And the fallout of it was that they asked Caltrans to initiate a study, a feasibility study, on looking at the aspects of traffic calming through the main street of Ventura Avenue as it goes through town. I think there's concerns about speed. There's 28,000 cars that go through Casitas every day. That's a lot of traffic. I don't pretend to know what those answers are, or do they for that matter, but they are going to initiate a study, and I commend them for that.
So there was traffic calming in Casitas Springs or in Oakview?
Well, I would say just looking at, for the main drag, the speed of cars, you have issues where you go from 2 lanes to 4 lanes.
Yeah.
And it's human nature to speed up when there's more room. And there's some concerns about that, lack of, crosswalks, that sort of thing, whether or not, what was interesting is, one of the responses from Caltrans was that typically, almost the great majority of the time, it's the reversal. People want more lanes. They want to go faster. And I think it's sort of reflective of who we are in our community here. And really, they have to think of it in the context of 33 as it extends up through, right through our downtown area. It's just not segmented necessarily, so it should be good information for discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have a representative from the MAC here? Yeah. Bill, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, I will.
We don't typically do that, but come on up.
Bill Miley, North Signal Street. I've always thought about what they did to Oakview by putting those 4 lanes in and screwing up the community. I was told by someone who knows that before it was 4-lane, it was 2-lane. There were oak trees on both sides, all the way along.
That's
It
why it's
apparently
called
was a
Oakview,
beautiful
sure.
community. I wasn't here then.
Yeah.
Was anybody here then?
No.
Yeah.
For my time.
Well, they probably would have never been able to do it today with our protection of oak trees. Anyway.
Probably not.
Thank you. All right. Next is a public hearing item. Text Amendment TA 1203 for an ordinance entitled Water Efficient Landscaping Standards, amending Title 10, Chapter 2, Article 12 of the Ojai Municipal Code. This is continued from several previous Planning Commission meetings. And could we hear from staff on this, please?
Mr. Chairman, Joseph Fletcher, City Attorney. If you can, I think you need to do public comment on non-agenda items before we take up the agenda.
I think you are correct.
Good catch.
How did I skip that? Public communications. Thank you. It's a good thing we have the attorney here. Yeah, we screwed up the whole thing. Public communications is time set aside during the Planning Commission meeting for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on items of city business other than scheduled agenda items. Matters raised at this time may be briefly discussed by the Commission and will generally be referred to staff and/or placed on a subsequent agenda. Under state law, other than for emergency items, no action can be taken at this meeting. Is there anyone that wants to speak on anything that's not on the agenda? Mr. Ulrich.
Well, you were here first. William Ulrich, 487 Gridley Road. I just have a question and a comment. I noticed that there are apparently at least 2 commission members who are not here, in addition to the 3rd member who is apparently resigned. So at this point, we have a bare quorum, if my observation is accurate. There are 4 of you, or 5 of you, excuse me. My observation, my apologies. Notwithstanding, I'd like to ask a question and perhaps make a comment, and that relates to how many of the sitting members are being, at this point, given the controversy, shall we say, regarding the non-residency issues that is pertinent to at least a couple of you folks, are being influenced at this particular point by perhaps council members, specifically given the next week's activity relative to the presentation and review of the cell tower. That is a question for the 5 members.
So I believe of the 5 that we have here,
Have each of you been contacted, or any of you been contacted by a council member and influenced to either remain or depart? I can't make it any more clear.
I have not been contacted by anyone.
Okay.
I haven't either.
Okay.
I just want to be clear about your question. Did you say in regards to the cell tower?
No, I meant in regards to remaining on the commission.
I was contacted.
Okay.
Because I fall in that category of living outside of the city, I too was contacted.
Okay. Contact does not tell me the nature of the influence, however.
Well,
Were you?
I don't know that it's any.
Were you? Well, excuse
Excuse
me.
me.
Public comment. I'm just
Public
asking
comment
a
is
question,
fine,
Mr.
but
Murphy.
it's not really a dialogue at this point.
Excuse me.
It's not really a dialogue at this point. It's more of, if you have a comment to make, we'd like to hear
Okay.
it. But
It's not. So you're saying that this is not appropriate venue for dialogue, but is only for comment.
Correct.
Okay. Then I would say, from a practical perspective, in my last 46 seconds, that ideally that influence is influencing the 2 members who have been contacted to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. For the record, I was contacted by Commissioner Clapp as well. So we've all had quite a number of discussions this past week about this issue. Dale, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. Dale Hansen. I do live in the city. Since I'm one of those that requested that all planning commissioners live in the city, since they weigh in so heavily on the vote, and I realize that you are only advisory to the council and they have that final decision, but your advice does count for an awful lot, otherwise why would we have you? And I don't have anything against any of you. I think you, as Betsy Clapp said, you all do a wonderful job. I appreciate it and respect all of you. And I'm sorry that Paul has, I guess, resigned, not because of residency, I think because of absence, I'm not sure. But anyway, I like all of you. I appreciate what you contribute to the city. I just think that if you're going to weigh in on the laws of this city, you should live under those laws. Now, someone at the last council meeting, I think it was Bill Wyrick, made the suggestion that possibly there would be two of you allowed to live outside the city. Therefore, the chances of there being a majority vote by the, like if one of the residents were absent, there wouldn't be a majority vote, then it would be unlikely. I'm fine with that. I really think you should all live in the city, but, I'm willing to compromise, and I just want to say that I appreciate all of your work. I mean, I know you all contribute and you're volunteers. It's not a paid job. So I just want to put that on the record for where I stand, and I know that I speak for other people as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Is there anyone else who would like to speak during this period? Okay. We'll move on to the agenda items then, which is the text amendment, TA 1203. So could we hear from staff on this, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the commission, Joseph Fletcher, City Attorney. I've given the presentation. I drafted this and worked with the committee on putting it together, so they've asked me to present it. This is was first back before you in January. The purpose of this ordinance is to adopt state-mandated standards for water efficiency calculations related to new landscape installations in the city. What the ordinance before you, when we were before you in January, we had drafted an ordinance that basically took the requirements of the state law and put them into one section of Article 12, Section 10-2.1205, and left the balance of the ordinance substantially unchanged. At that time, the commission asked if we would go back and revise the entire Article 12 to make sure we have continuity in terminology and language of the terms used both in the state mandated provisions as well as our existing provisions of the municipal code. So we've done that, and that's what's back before you tonight. What you saw in 1205 is now in various different sections of Article 12, and I have conformed all the terminology such as concept landscape plans and detailed landscape plans in terms of the submittals, put them together. This is substantively the same materials that was before you in January. And again, the substantial additions to the code are additions of state required definitions that have been added to the definitional section. And then Article 12, Section 1205 talks about the requirements of a water budget calculation as part of certain projects that might be submitted. It's conceivable that someone could have a development project that requires landscape plans and design review for design review purposes that may not have to submit the water budget calculations. It's a function of the size of the type of project, single family, multifamily, commercial, and the amount of landscaping involved. We haven't really attempted to try to speculate whether that, how often someone could submit something that wouldn't require a budget calculation. It's all laid out in there, and if you want to look at the core of the regulations, that's 10-2.1205, which is the water use standards and what's called the maximum applied water allowance calculations. Other than that, prepared to answer any questions. On the agenda, there's two actions we're recommending for you this evening. The first is to adopt a resolution recommending this draft ordinance to the City Council for adoption. The second one is to appoint an ad hoc committee to work with staff on bringing back to the Commission and the Council revised landscape regulations. The city has had on the books a set of landscape regulations dealing everything from the numbers and size of plan submittals to the qualifications of landscape architects to permitted and permitted and prohibited plants that was adopted back in the early 90s, last time the state mandated a statewide landscaping ordinance. We developed some revised guidelines, regulations, to deal with the submittals for the water budget calculations, and working with the committee of the commission as well as staff, we believe it would be most appropriate to take those 1992 regulations and merge them with the required new language coming from the state and and bring back to the city council a new revised, updated landscape regulation package. The ordinance, assuming you recommend it tonight, will go to the council and be adopted sometime in April or May and go into effect in May or June. I think this leaves enough time for you to work with staff to develop those revised regulations and bring them back for adoption by the council about the same time that the ordinance goes into effect, so they can merge at the end of the process. And I stand here ready to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for staff? I have a question. I'm confused because I thought the ordinance was the regulations.
No, the ordinance is what I prefer to do in drafting the ordinance is the ordinance contains mandatory language, the core rules. The regulations that we've had, with current regulations in place, as well as the proposed revisions go beyond that into recommendations on the form and timing of plan submittals, as well as what we're adding, particularly as a lot of agencies have done with the water budget calculations, is some examples of how to conduct how to do the math. It's a fairly complex mathematics, especially for poli-sci majors like me. The regulations are also contain guidelines to help folks through the calculation process to understand exactly how. And then the city has had on the books for quite some time regulations, particularly tied around the design review process on types of submittals, so size of plants, land, irrigation requirements, size of irrigation pipes, irrigation design. Regulations, they become the rules of the city. They're enforceable, but they are more easily modified as time goes by. So those are in a set of regulations, not in the code. Together, the code and these regulations and guidelines constitute the process to submit and get landscape plans approved.
I see. Thank you.
I have a question for
Sure.
you, Joseph. So since 2010, and it relates to the 1992 series of regulations, I've read here that it says if a local jurisdiction did not by January 1st, 2010 adopt new regulations that met the requirements of AB 1881, such local jurisdictions were preempted from applying their existing regulations and instead compelled to follow the requirements of the standards set forth by the state. So does that mean since 2010, really our existing regulations have been totally ineffective, or how or is it parted out? Is it portioned out from that? Or?
And I can't answer the questions about what the effect of by not adopting a local ordinance by 2010, the state promulgated called model ordinance became the ordinance to follow, and it's actually, believe it or not, as cumbersome as this ordinance may be, if you've looked at the state model ordinance, it's far worse. And actually, many of the things that we recommend we put in the regulations are found in the model ordinance. So I maybe have to talk to the director or maybe other members of the commission. I don't know what has been the city's practice to ensure that we were meeting the model ordinance requirements, which is substantially is that water budget calculation. Mm-hmm. That's what the state mandated with the model ordinance back that went into effect in 2010. I wasn't here, so I'm not sure how on the ground. But and that's one of the things we're trying to do is we had a set of 1992 requirements, then we had the state imposed 2010 requirements, and I think since then and now, it's been a process of staff and applicants and landscape architects and designers trying to make the two mesh as much as they possibly could, and maybe Ms. Nolan might have more experience on how it really works on the ground. And so the goal here is to bring our regulations all into one place and up to date, so as streamlined as can be done.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Any other questions? Good. This is a public hearing. Is there anybody that would like to speak on the landscape ordinance?
Can I ask a question, please?
Certainly.
Are we talking about, I guess it's more complicated than this, but are we talking about drought-tolerant plants? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And
Maybe Commissioner Nolan can explain that in more detail.
So basically, in our landscape standards, the city encourages the use presently of climate-appropriate or drought-tolerant or California native plants because they use less water and they work in our climate here, and they're native here. But in the new ordinance, they encourage the use of those, but they don't restrict you to that. So basically, you can put lawn in if you want, but you're given a certain amount of water that you can use on a certain site based on, if you're putting a swimming pool, a spa, any kind of water feature or fountain, those are included into your calculation, and then all the areas where plants are going to be located. And they give you an allocation number, and then you calculate. All these different items have a factor. You do a calculation, and you figure out how much water that landscape is going to use, and you can't exceed that maximum allowable number. But you still can put lawn in, you can put other plants that may be considered high water use, but you may have to balance those with some low water use things so you don't exceed the number. Does that make sense?
yeah, and thank you for that
Yeah.
explanation. So if there's a resident in town and they're not abiding by that, we'll have the guy go out and fine them, or how does that work?
Basically, it's only for new construction or something that comes in with a permit and you meet, there's certain criteria. Okay. So people that already have an existing landscape, you're fine, unless people want to change it and they want to save water, that makes sense. But there's no regulation on that. And there's, basically the plans have to be signed by the preparer, the landscape architect, or it can be a design-build contractor. And then it gets monitored during the building process to make sure that everything is installed per the plans. And then before sign-off, it has to be signed again. So anyway, it's regulated during the installation process.
I see how it works. Okay, thank you so much.
It really only applies to commercial
No,
at
it's
this
new
point, right?
construction.
New construction, okay.
Yeah, over a certain amount of square foot.
Yeah, good. And Dale, these are all state requirements that we're just basically folding into our city ordinance, so. All right, anybody else would like to speak on this? Oh, Bill Miley.
Bill Miley, North Signal Street. I want to speak about just what you were focusing on. The maximum calculated water allowance, I think that's what's in the ordinance, for the landscaping that's going to be developed under a permit. How is that going to be measured? Are they going to put in a separate water meter for the landscaping? I would imagine that when the plan is submitted and approved, all the calculations will show that so much water is going to be used by the 20 plants, the 7 trees, the 20 feet of lawn or whatever. And that would be calculated that way, based on known botanical evidence. Well, what's to prevent the person from planting more trees, more plants, more grass, and not telling you and using more water? How is the water going to be measured 2 years from the time that the permit has been given and the planning has been done?
I do believe, and I was trying to find where it's located, a separate meter is required, and I need to go back and look, and I don't think it's for every project, and I think it depends on maybe, I think if it's over 5,000 square feet, I have to, I'm sorry, I need to find it. Do you know, did you see that?
Yeah, it's on section 2.
Oh, thank you.
And it
I'm on
says,
section
I'll
2.
just read it for
Yeah, go ahead,
for you.
thanks.
In addition, the following landscape projects shall include required plan submittals for new or rehabilitation projects for public agency and non-residential private development projects with a landscape area equal to or greater than 2,500 square feet. New or rehabilitation projects which are developer installed for single-family or multifamily residence and projects or complexes with a landscape area equal to or greater than 2,500 square feet, and new construction landscapes which are homeowner provided which is 5,000 square feet.
Yes.
So
But his
that-
question was about the meter, and I know there was something
Yeah.
about the water meter, and I'm
Well,
sorry, I
It
was,
doesn't apply. The point is it doesn't
Doesn't?
apply to all the
Right.
existing houses in Ojai
Oh,
that have
no,
landscape.
I understand that. It seems that unless, well, Commissioner Nolan, you've seen that in there someplace where it says separate water meter has to be installed to measure the water for the permitted landscape, right?
right. Excuse me, I will look for it,
Okay.
and after the meeting, if you wanted to contact me, unless somebody else knows where it is.
Well, my finishing comment would be,
Yeah.
it seems something like that is going to be really important, and then who's going to look at it? But maybe it could be radio, you could set up in, like the electric meters, the message could go automatically to the city. That's a joke. But it seems to me that this is a really good thing to do, the maximum applied water allowance section, because in the future, with the way things are going with water and droughts, all of us may have a maximum allowance for landscaping that we'll have to stay under, and this will be a good test to see how it would work. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Yes, sir.
could, members of the commission, actually, the current code requires a separate meter. It's in section 10-2.1206, which we're not amending. And it requires separate landscape water meter shall be installed for all projects except for detached single-family homes with areas less than 5,000 square feet. So, and answer Mr. Miley's other question, there are no water police. At least we don't have. The city doesn't. Remember, and Ojai is a unique place when it comes to the local agencies because we are not a water purveyor. So in some cities, they have the water department. They're the water purveyor, and they are the regulatory body. In our case, of course, we have currently 2 water purveyors. Maybe in the future, only 1 water purveyor, depending how things go. And actually, the water police responsibility really falls on the water purveyor. And so there's nothing in this there's a separate meter required. This doesn't call for any regulation, licensing, overview, or reporting of actual water use. This ordinance is a balance, the state mandate is a balance between state goals of water conservation and local control. So what the state had back in the 90s was really a qualitative standard. They did it through what was then called drought-tolerant plants. So it is what you can and can't plant, the assumption being the more low water usage plants, the more water will be saved. What they did with the 2010 regulations is go to a quantitative standard, saying we don't really care what you plant, but you're going to go through a process that reviews the water assumed water consumption of what you're planting, and you're only allowed to plant material that consumes, based on the MAWA, so much water. Truthfully, no one's going around and be reading that meter and saying you're going over what we assume is going to be. If you want to if someone wants to overwater their partially decomposed granite, then I guess they can. There's certain assumptions here also, because another part of this is there are limits and design criteria on irrigation equipment and where you can install the irrigation, where you can't install the irrigation. This is like a lot of other development standards, though, when the day is done. The project is built, it's what's required, as you mentioned earlier, is at the design process, there are requirements. Those are reviewed by staff as part of the application process, and then through the build-out process, just like building inspection goes, the building inspectors will inspect the landscape plan, the landscape installation, and the irrigation installations to make sure they conform to standards, and that is then certified. And then the designer has to issue a certificate of compliance that what got installed is in fact what was approved in the plans. What someone does with their yard after that really is beyond the scope of these regulations.
By the way, I did find it. It's in section 10-2.1206. Item I, the separate landscape water meter shall be installed for all projects except for detail.
Thank you, Esther. Much appreciated. This is, as I said, a public hearing. Do we have any other comments on this item? Could I get a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Do we have any discussion, or can we finally take a vote on this? Kathleen, I want to commend you guys for all the work that went into this, because it's been, how many years that we've been working on this?
Actually, it was interesting. I think it was my first or second night of planning commission, and I think it was January, maybe February of 2010, because it was after the January 1st, 2010 deadline. City Council had given to staff a list of ordinances and what have you that we needed to work on and form subcommittees. And I remember scratching my head when they first announced it, going, "Oh my gosh, more time!" Now I'm the person who puts in too much time. But anyway, so the first year we had a subcommittee. I chaired that committee, and we worked with staff. And then we actually skipped a year, and then a following year, one other committee member, myself, ended up working through it. So basically, and Mr. Fletcher described it, we sorted out the state ordinance, which anyone's welcome to look up. You can look on the state website, just to make it more clear and user-friendly. And actually what we did do was pull some material out of our landscape standards, Article 12, and those guidelines that we referred to earlier, the 1993 guidelines. And we created, I guess what are we calling now? The regulation? A regulation. I still call it a checklist because it's in a checklist format, but it does include the regulations.
We went back and
Yeah,
forth
we went back and forth on what to call it.
terminology. There was a member of the committee who felt that
Yeah.
guidelines, and it's
With a
correct,
little-
guidelines are really shoulds, and regulations are shalls.
shalls.
These are really shalls.
Yeah.
So I'm teaching myself to say regulations.
Yeah, so I'm saying
But
regulations too.
there are guidances within those
Right.
regulations.
So we did form that, and that'll be, I guess, will we be able to, that's not part of the ordinance, but will the city be able to use those
Right, what we're recommending is
forms?
that actually as a second action tonight would be appoint another ad hoc
That's
committee. That will work with staff to
Okay.
take the 1992 standards and revise them, putting
Okay.
in, adding the new materials that come from the guidances and regulations from the state, the model ordinance. And as I said earlier, that because this ordinance won't go into effect until late May or June, because it has to go to the council, first reading and second reading, and then a 30-day referendum period, it won't go into effect until May or even June. That gives the commission staff enough time to, it's really a matter of just staff time of doing the drafting work to create a new set of merge regulations.
Okay.
Have you received those at a meeting next month? And recommend them to the council, which the council could adopt about the same time the ordinance goes into effect. So when the new regulation, when our new ordinance goes into effect and applicants have to start complying, we believe we'll have in time to have those new updated regulations also in effect and be able to be distributed to the community. And then last thing the committee talked about was adopting working staff on another document, which is really a set of guidelines and a workbook to help something to help people really understand how to do quality water efficient landscaping. There's other agencies around the state that have put together really outreach documents and that's something you can add to your work product.
So the appendices that we produced, which you reviewed,
Yes.
would go into that document that you just spoke
All
of.
what was in what
Right.
the commission put together late last year
Right.
had a lot of appendices. Those are now really the new proposed regulations that we would bring back to you in a month or
Okay.
so.
Oh, I guess, I kind of went off, I'm sorry, on a tangent, but it was all related to the water ordinance. And it was about the ad hoc committee. I just wanted to mention what would be included. You mentioned some of it, but basically it has to do with like some tree planting standards, recommended plant list, and upgrading the invasive plant species, upgrading the landscape fire plant list, and that type. Generally, that's what's included in those 1993 guidelines that are out of date, just so everybody knows.
Mr. Fletcher, and maybe Kathy, So is this, going back to the water meter question, is that particular requirement, was that part of the state mandated, or was that something integrated into from our previous?
It has been on our
regulation?
books for some time. It's in the current code. It's not in the ordinance that is before you to consider tonight. The ordinance, that's in section 10-2.1206, which we're not amending. So that's been a requirement to separately meter irrigation for, let me read it again, for projects with landscaping more than 5,000 square feet, non-single family. So you see that, and it's very common in industrial and commercial projects. You're going to see a separate irrigation water meter. But for single family homes do not require a separate one. Multifamily does, unless landscaping is under 5,000 square feet.
So just to clarify this concept here of what a water meter is defined as, if you go try to get a new water meter and you're on Casitas Water, it's $30,000. You know, it's really expensive. So I want to be sure that that we understand that it's more of metrics that we're looking at here, not an actual additional dedicated water meter.
I'd ask the code requires a separate meter. That can clearly be a sub meter.
A sub meter would be crucial to the understanding of this.
Right, and so that's all the code currently requires. A separate landscape water meter shall be installed for all projects except for detached single-family homes or any project of less than 5,000.
That's a lot less expensive.
Yeah, it doesn't mean a separate water service. There's no reason you would bring in a separate water service. You simply sub-meter it for the
I just didn't see sub-meter in
It doesn't
this,
say that.
But it's in the...
And if it's not, we'll make sure it's in the regulations.
Great.
You know, I didn't bring my copy. I had a whole folder, and I walked out without it, where I have the state ordinance, because I thought, well, if I need to refer to it, no, I don't have it. But I believe in the state ordinance, it may be a recommendation, I don't know off the top of my head, but they do talk about separate water meters also.
That's true.
So I'm not sure if it was exactly the same as our existing one or not.
It may not, and also keep in mind that the state model ordinance unfortunately kind of presumes that the city is the water purveyor also.
Right.
Where if we had a water department, we could tell people what to install and how the meters get installed. We can't mandate the Casitas install a sub-meter on someone's property. We can, but the point is that, and again, we've been requiring this, so I'm assuming it's a sub-meter, and I'll make sure we're working with this, that we make it clear that it's not a separate water service. It's only a means that you could separately calculate the actual water consumption for the landscaped area.
Right.
But again, our ordinance doesn't presume that we're going to be going out
Right.
and policing that. Although I have to say, I guess, just like we do police ongoing development, make sure people, install they keep the plants alive or replace them if they're required to, like trees. I got to tell you, we could.
It'd be similar to what we do with building regulations. If you build a building, once it's built and it's signed off, then unless somebody complains, we're not going to go back and re-inspect it or anything.
Exactly.
Well, Kathleen, do you want to make a motion on this? Is it time after 4 years?
I have
the honor.
I will make a motion, let me get back to so I can read this correctly, that we approve, excuse me, let me make sure I'm reading the right thing here. Approve a categorical exemption and adopt PC Resolution 14-02, is it? Recommending that the City Council adopt an ordinance entitled Water Efficient Landscaping Standards that amends Section 10-2.1205 of Chapter 2 of Title 10 of the Ojai Municipal Code. And, I wonder if we need to have a discussion about the ad hoc committee.
I think we do.
Is it okay if
Because
I pause for a second?
You make two motions. Actually, Carl, there's a typo there. It's
Make it
Title
two?
12, not Title, I'm sorry, it's Chapter 12, not Chapter,
Oh, not 10, right.
yeah.
Okay, it's
Sorry.
Chapter 12.
But yeah, make that motion, and then you
Okay.
can take up,
Okay, so let me finish, of Chapter 2 of Title 10 of the Ojai Municipal Code, and I will scratch the "and."
I will second that if no one else will. Do we have any more discussion on that? Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Zabilla,
Yes.
Jaggiello,
Yes.
Foster,
Yes.
Nolan,
Yes.
Chair Merk.
Yes. So we still have outstanding the appointment of an ad hoc committee, and I have to say, I don't feel comfortable appointing an ad hoc committee at this point due to all the turmoil from the city council.
I was going to mention the same thing,
Yeah.
so.
So I think we will, I don't know, can we just table that? Does it have to be part of the agenda?
No, you definitely have the right to do that.
Yeah.
And checking with the director, I think with staff will continue to work on putting that document together to present to somebody.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for all your work on that. Again, that was a lot of work. Next is a discussion item. Text amendment of the Ojai Municipal Code amending Section 10-2.404 and Section 10-2.3003 of the city's zoning ordinance regarding residential building heights, TA 13-03, and adding Section 10-2.405, establishing a solar access height limitation. And could we hear from staff on this, please?
Thank you, Chair and members of the Commission. As you know, we've been working on this potential change to the height limit for some time, and we've had a number of discussions before the Planning Commission as well as the City Council, and we're recommending that a hearing be set on this on April 2nd. So the purpose of the discussion this evening is just to fine-tune it in preparation for that hearing. And I'd like to just go over some of the basic provisions. There's really three main areas in which the height ordinance is proposed to be changed. One is the general height limit for residential structures. The recommendation there is to reduce it from 30 feet to 25 feet, but to allow up to 30 feet for architectural features. And then there's been one addition to the language there, which is to indicate that roof lines would also be included in that additional 5 feet from 25 to 30 feet. And that was an item that had come up at the last Planning Commission review. And it's really a clarification. The intention was to allow higher roof lines in the original language, but this clarifies that that is in fact the case. Second, there's a proposed new requirement that originally came from the Planning Commission to require design review of single-story buildings. Originally, the suggestion was to require it of single-story buildings in excess of 20 feet. In this version, we've increased that to 24 feet, and the reason for that increase was, again, to address roof lines as it related to providing solar equipment and so forth. And so one question that's really before you tonight is whether or not you would prefer that the ordinance go to 24 feet or stay at 20 feet for design review of a single-story building. And then the third area is the solar access provisions. And in this case, we've generally followed what has been developed and what has worked well in the city of Santa Barbara. And you may recall that at the last meeting where this was discussed, we had a representative of the staff, a senior planner from the city of Santa Barbara, come in and respond to questions that the commission had about how the ordinance was administered in Santa Barbara and what their experience was there. One of the other questions that came up is, what do solar contractors think about the proposed ordinance? And I did have a meeting about a week and a half ago with 4 solar contractors to go over the ordinance. They, of course, thought it was great. They'd also been invited to attend the meeting this evening to give you a chance to ask them questions directly, but I don't see any of them in the audience tonight, so for whatever reason, I don't think we have them here. I will extend an invitation to them to come to the hearing on April 2nd if it's your pleasure to have the hearing at that date. And that would give you an opportunity to get their input. Originally, we thought this was on a faster track, and we had proposed an effective date of July 1st of 2014. We've now, in this version, pushed that back to January 1st of 2015. And part of the reason for pushing that back is that there's also a need to develop guidelines for the solar access portion, and we wanted to allow enough time to get those guidelines in place before the ordinance went into effect. So if the ordinance is adopted and that's the effective date, We will start with the guidelines that had been developed by the city of Santa Barbara and see if there's any refinements to those that may be needed in the city of Ojai. So that concludes my presentation, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Okay. Any commissioners have any questions for staff? Question seems to be forming here, am I right?
Just had one question as I was going through reading the document, and it had, this was on the height limitations. That would be attachment B, item B under 10-2.405. And it's exemptions. It says the following shall be exempt from the height limitations. And I think I just needed clarity on this. And this would be on 5C. And it says, fall entirely within the boundaries of an existing covered or, I think it means uncovered, paved, off-street parking area or paved driveway leading thereto. And I wasn't sure if it meant if the building was next to an adjacent parking area.
That is what it
I just
means.
kind of got confused.
Yeah, I can see where that's confusing. That is the language from the Santa Barbara ordinance.
Okay.
And they do have an alternate means.
Mhm.
The primary means of looking at the height limit is to go up 12 feet and then
Right.
go at a 30-degree angle. But there's an alternate method where you can do a shadow plan
Right.
and demonstrate that, for example, you're not shading the structure, even if you're shading the parking area, existing parking area.
The comment that I had about that was, in the event that somebody wanted to put solar on their top of a parking structure. You don't see, I mean, you see it in commercial applications more than you do in residential now, but as solar is becoming more refined and not as bulky, down the road, it may be something where somebody would want to put solar on top of a structure. So I don't know if that should be deleted, that one clause about the covered paved parking. Or it's worth discussion, I think.
Yeah, I think the best thing
Yeah.
to do is for me to talk to the people in Santa
Okay.
Barbara again and see if that's been an issue there and get their feedback on it.
Okay.
And then I can report back in the staff report for April 2nd.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Clark. Kathleen, did you have anything you want to add?
No, I don't. I'm sorry.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone that would like to speak on this matter? I would be surprised if you didn't want to speak, Mr. Miley.
Bill Miley, Signal Street. On the shadow plan, is it, so I have a question, is it solely focused on solar shadows, solar energy structures casting a shadow on the northerly neighbors? Or does it have to do with physical structure, one-story, two-story, a residential house?
It's the whole
Shadow.
building. It's the whole building. It doesn't
Whole
matter what
building.
part of it it is, yeah.
If this ordinance was in place a year ago, would the buildings over on Blanche, just around the corner over here at the Ojai Trail, would that two-story structure have been allowed, which totally blocks the sun from the little house on the northern side?
Do you know the answer to that, Kevin?
I'm guessing it probably wouldn't be, but, we'd probably have to look what the setbacks were, but Rob's right behind you, Mr. Clark.
Oh, I drove by at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was totally in shadow. I don't think it ever gets any
I'll
sun.
take a shot at answering your question. I'm sorry I'm sneaking up behind you.
Oh, you can sneak up behind me anytime.
So that particular project is 3 separate parcels, and so the height limit would be measured on each separate parcel. So if you go up 12 feet and then across at a 30-degree angle, That, I would think, without knowing exactly what their dimensions are, would be an issue for them.
I would think so.
I would agree. I think it would be, just looking at it.
Yeah.
So yes, to answer your question, Bill, probably.
So I'm really in favor of that section. That's a good one.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else would like to comment on that? All right, could we have a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Do we have a second? It's a discussion item.
Oh, yeah, that's
We don't even have to close the public hearing. All right, any discussion? Any comments from commissioners?
Well, sure. Looking at the discussion items and the way it's laid out, there was one alternative to this proposal that I think is worthy of discussion. And what triggers this idea is for years we've been trying to approach neighborhood planning because we realize the distinction from one section of Ojai to the next, the Arbolada to Shady Lane to to Blanche Street, and to blanket the entire area with a single ordinance, I find it a little restrictive because you're talking in a lot of these areas the lots are really tight and small. And then you get into an area where the lots can be considerably larger. So I'm thinking there needs to be some flexibility in this ordinance to allow for something like that. Not exactly sure how it would look if it's maybe a certain size property. Just for an example, let's say it's 20,000 square feet or more. Maybe that owner could apply for some special use or conditional use permit to that would enable the designing or the planning commission to take a look at it and actually do a design review on it to allow for flexibility in those situations. I just think that there needs to be flexibility.
Go ahead.
Sure. Well, I too had the same question. And I'm not sure when we're going to start the neighborhood planning, but I know that council did budget, I believe it was $30,000 last year, to start that. But do we have any indication of when we will be starting the neighborhood planning?
Thank you. Yes, the city council discussed its work plan at the last council meeting, and sort of the first step in the neighborhood planning is waiting to see whether we get a grant or not, which we should know in May. And so if we receive the grant, we'll have a very substantial budget to do neighborhood planning with, which would be great. If we don't, we still have the $30,000, and so we'll have to come back and design a scope that takes a very beneficial first step at neighborhood planning. So the schedule that we suggested to the council is wait for the grant in May, and then start a discussion with the Planning Commission and council about the scope of the work, and then go out with an RFP.
Thank you.
So this is the what's the name of the grant again?
The Strategic Growth Council, trying to think, Sustainable Communities Grant.
Yes.
Just to note for people at home that grant was applied for through the great efforts of Kathleen Nolan. That's another example I have of what a great council we have, planning commission we have, and why we need to be very concerned about the proposal brought before council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clapp. I would have brought that up if you hadn't.
So along Stephen's lines, because I had the same question, I ideally would love to see us look at this through the neighborhood planning, but that may take a while. So I'm wondering if we can adopt this as is. Maybe we want to make a couple modifications, but it would be possible to go back and then revise the text and somehow integrate the neighborhood planning process into it. And maybe that's just two different things and too crazy.
It's a discussion item, so we could make any recommendations we
Okay,
wanted.
so I'm wondering if that's even a possibility.
Yeah, we'd be glad to look at that. I think there really are two different ideas here. One idea is to provide some sort of flexibility, as Commissioner Foster said, and we could put together some language for you to consider when this comes up again about how to do that. And then the other could be some sort of language of intent that relates to the ultimate desire to include this in neighborhood planning. And again, we could design some language for you to review at the April 2nd meeting if you'd like.
Great, thank you. Any other discussion? All right, we will move on. The next discussion item is changes to the village mixed-use zoning district regulations. And could we hear from staff on this, please?
Yes, thank you. Excuse me. It was requested that staff bring back the overview of changes to the village mixed-use zoning district regulations. And staff has prepared a report here that kind of details out the history of those changes. Just like to indicate that in 2004, the city retained Thomas Figg to analyze development trends in the village mixed-use, VMU zone. And that, as stated in the staff report, there were various workshops and public outreach and ultimately a planning commission public hearing to consider those changes. Ultimately, it went up to the city council. They held a discussion to consider the planning commissions and redevelopment agencies as well as city staff recommendations. And then at some point, it appeared as though from 2004 to spring 2007, that there were various workshops. Staff wasn't able to specifically identify each workshop, but there was workshops that were held. And then we began the housing element update process, which I think we know as cycle 4 of the housing element. And so that became stalled, and that process did not commence again until 2012, which may be why there's some confusion of all the changes that were suggested to the VMU and whether there was significant workshops or public outreach. So then in June 2012, the housing element update process, also known as Cycle 4, was resurrected after a long delay, and they resumed the work from the point that it had stopped. And then in January 2012, the Planning Commission received proposed changes to the VMU that were identified under the housing production programs within the housing element as meeting part of the city's RENA. That's a typo in there, not FINA, but RENA. And so the intentions of the changes that were to provide by development by right and to provide flexible standards with a discretionary permit within the VMU. So with that, in October 9th, 2012, the City Council adopted the housing element update with the planning horizon of 2006 to 2014, and which included the implementation tools such as they were aggregated in one update, the VMU changes. And with that, the May 28th, 2013, the City Council adopted the Ordinance 826, which then became the implementation of those tools that were spelled out in the housing element. So with that, I think we can just say that the basic premise behind the VMU changes were two things. One, to achieve the city's RENA needs and to provide flexible standards. So the base district did see some alterations, and I think that's where we're seeing these queries about why the changes is in the VMU. But in addition to those base changes by right standards that were set in the ordinance, you also developed a process by where they could go through the plan development process, and they had flexible, or the opportunity to provide flexible standards going through that alternate discretionary permit process. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for staff? It's a complicated issue, I know. I never really, I was here when Mr. Figg made his report and so on, and I think one of the things he was looking into was whether the VMU was actually effective as a zoning tool. And I don't know that we ever came to a conclusion on that, other than it does provide a certain amount of flexibility, but I don't know that people are really taking advantage of it, or that it's actually working that well.
Yeah, I think that's in the background that I read. I think that was the whole intent: is it being developed as people think it should be? I mean, is that actually impractical speaking, is that what's happening? I don't know. I would think that that's why they made changes to the VMU, because they saw it not being done as they wished it to be, or how it was projected to be. Ergo, they made changes hoping that that would then affect how development occurred on those parcels.
Yeah, it's actually been interesting to watch over the years. There's a building at the corner of Kenyatta and Aliso Streets, which was built, David Bowie actually designed it as a VMU building, and it was originally designed as retail on the first floor and residential on the second floor. And then someone bought it from the developer, and they said, oh, I want it to be just a house. So it was a house for several years. But now it's the Livingston Memorial has their headquarters there, so it's got the flexibility to do all different kinds of things. It's been pretty interesting to watch.
Full circle.
Yeah, it keeps just going back and forth.
There's residential upstairs.
Yeah. Any other discussion with staff? This is just a discussion item. Anybody in the public want to speak on this item? It's a good thing you're here, Mr. Miley, otherwise we'd never get any comments.
Well, I prepared for this, actually. I just lost it on my iPad, but near the end of the ordinance, and I communicated this to our Kathleen, our community director, that there's a section in there that requires a residential building report on the sale of the building. My understanding was that that had been deleted by the city council.
I don't know.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
The supplemental material that's in the packet along with the VMU was that ordinance 826. And it included a lot of different items in it. So there was, anyway, to answer the question directly, yes, it's been deleted. The reporting has been subsequently deleted in a subsequent ordinance. I was just providing this for, and I apologize if it was misleading, but I was giving you Ordinance 826 to just show you the history and how the VMU changes got adopted. It did include other things that have subsequently been changed.
Okay, thank you. Do you need any?
It is gone.
Yep. Do you need any further direction on this, or do you have enough information?
If you think that answers the questions that have come up from the public, then I think we're fine. If you think that needs something more, I'll be happy to take additional direction from you.
Okay. Any other comments or stuff?
Are you talking as it pertains to this? Yeah. Okay. I think I'm good.
All right. Well, let's move on to director reports and director actions.
Okay, I would just like to make an announcement that, tonight we were scheduled to give you your packets for the next upcoming special meeting on the 26th. Due to mechanical difficulties with our uncooperative copy machine, and it's a rather large packet, it just didn't cooperate, so we'll be giving those out in the morning, so for the meeting on the 26th, and we apologize. We understand everybody's anxious to get that packet, but these kind of things, they seem to know when you're in a hurry or it's urgent and usually break down. So with that, then I'd also like to just move on to director's decisions. There's one that was done in this last time period at 959 East Ojai Avenue. It was just a temporary banner that was approved. And also would like to just point out that we have our active code enforcement log for your consideration, and I'd be open to any questions or clarifications on that. And then the next page we have for you under item 7, we have the upcoming future planning commission items. And as well, I'm open to any kind of questions or clarifications for you.
Do we have any kind of timeline on the Emerald Iguana? It's been kind of coming up over and over again, but it's never actually made it to the agenda.
We've been working with them fairly consistently, and they're anxious to go forward too. I think that we have all the information that we need to go forward now. I think it's if you'd like, the next planning commission meeting, I can give you a more definitive answer. I think I personally have been sort of wrapped up in the cell tower issue, and I would just like to say that, we are trying to move them ahead, and they've been very cooperative.
Okay, I just noticed we've got 2 empty meetings here on the future items, so.
Well, there you go.
Got
We'll
plenty
work
of
towards
room.
those.
Okay. Planning Commission subcommittee reports. Do we have any?
Well, I can sign off on one of them.
Yes,
The
thank
model
goodness.
water ordinance tonight. Thank you. And complete streets. Oh, yeah, and I think I announced this last time, but we are extending our meetings from 1.5 hours to 2 hours, still on the first Wednesday of the month. So we will be starting our meetings it'll be from 2:30 to 3:30 here at City Hall. And we're always open to the public. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pardon?
2:30?
Oh, 2:30 to 4:30.
2:30.
So yeah, so we're going to start a half an hour early.
Okay. And Councilmember Clapp, do you have any further wisdom for us? Since you're last on the agenda, do you?
Oh, me?
Yeah, would you?
Wisdom?
I don't know.
Wisdom? Let me think here. Do I have any wisdom? No, I have no wisdom.
All right.
Just hope.
Thank you. Well, then our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.